recording, I think. Anyway, yeah, video. Oh, happy day. Shit. Anyway, sorry, gloving. Ugh. It's really difficult. So anyway, yeah, in the concept of guilt and depression again. Yeah, I just think he talks as if he doesn't like to generalize in this, but yet he does it, and then he brings up other people doing it. Icy here. Yeah. Wet ice. It's just wonderful. Anyway, this is going to be one hell of a day. Oh, gas. Anyway, depression. Yeah. Yeah, and guilt. All right. So the guilt thing, yeah, I just don't get. So, look, depression to some extent is a person's, they have to deal with their emotional character. But we are creatures of our mechanics, conditioning. And some of this stuff just isn't much you can do about. Your sensibilities are your sensibilities. And if they're perpetually violated, you're perpetually revolted, yeah, life is going to get tedious, frustrating, and depressing. I mean, that's sort of what the byproduct is. So some of that is sort of a mechanical, innate regulator. Whether depression, I don't know. The whole figuring it out evolutionarily, why we are capable of defeat, is sort of interesting. I mean, it does happen to some other animals, and so it's probably a byproduct of our, our flexible passion, that we can end up in a state of, disaffectualness. Maybe it's the ultimate, the game of alpha, beta, and depresta, something like that. When there's nothing to fight, there's no one to beat up. You just kind of have to internalize and go to sleep, so to speak. So there's no point in talking about the mechanism of depression, I suppose. It is a phenomenon that takes place in the human organism, and I'm certainly not saying people should be, that there's anything valuable in it, or that it's a respectable function. It's just a function, There's nothing good about it, nothing really functional about it, nothing, useful. Functional is the wrong word. But yeah, it's what people fall into when the circumstance compels it, demands it, forces it. And yeah. So anyway, Banana kind of odd is just basically he's doing the "don't worry, be happy" thing. I mean, it's not any more complicated than that. You can call it all kinds of other things, but he's just basically saying, if the world has got you down, change the world. Change the world inside of your own head. Just pretend it's only make-believe. That's taking responsibility for your existence somehow, which, I find laughable. And his whole way of mocking the words responsibility and accountability is just kind of funny. Yeah, I really should play his video, but I don't think I'll have time. It's gonna be just don't feel well enough for this day. Anyway, so where was I? Yeah, accountability, responsibility. and he implies that somehow the depressive, the person who has found life futile, frustrating, irritating, obnoxious, disgusting, revolting, threatening, horrifying, is somehow imposing guilt on the universe. He's trying to make the universe feel guilty or something. I mean, it's just it's such an insult, to the character of people's dignity. And then he cites these, totally failed civilizations, failed cultures, and their honor code or some kind of other bullshit, as if they have life figured out and they know how to do it right, and they have, horrific statistical dysfunction among them. Just amazing that he would cite them as an example of doing it right. Having the right attitude, the right disposition towards defining rights and wrongs. It really wasn't that much goddamn rain. Fuck. The stream is high. Son of a bitch. And such. Anyway. I tell you, this is going to be a horrible day. Yeah, just not doing well. Anyway. Deep breaths. Everything's fine. The world is just fine. Everything's fine. No problems. Yeah. Just believe it. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's always a preposterous lie. Just believe it anyway. Anyway. So, yeah, and there's lots of reasons why people get depressed. And, some of them are, kind of silly. It happens. People do silly things. And some of them are quite legitimate. People facing all kinds of, there's all kinds of people are facing horrible things happening to them, physically, very, very uncomfortable and nasty stuff, and they should find the prospect of their future kind of daunting and unpleasant to imagine. That's quite sensible. In terms of it's a reasonable to expect people to lack enthusiasm. Is that what depression is? A lack of enthusiasm? I suppose it does come to all kinds of degrees. I certainly feel it in doses. Very, very hard times, and then there's easier times. And again, it comes in two different forms, I suppose. Lack of desire, sort of a motivational temperament that's just kind of been knocked down a few notches. Or it can come in the form of, fear and horror and dread. And so, in terms of the mechanisms. But yeah, look, the argument, the subject is whether there's a enhanced or valuable perspective to be gained through a state of depression, a state of lack of enthusiasm. And I'm going to argue that, I think if you are less hungry, you're going to be capable of seeing things without the energy of desire painted on them, the energy of your addiction. It's going to be a more honest appraisal then, a more realistic appraisal. And I think quite obviously the enthusiastic player, the maintain as much want as you can in yourself. Keep marching and pushing and marching and pushing. That kind of psychology is built on the notion of a kind of addiction. Don't be satisfied. Don't be satiated. Don't be done with it. Keep looking for something more, something new to feed on. There's nothing there. I mean, that's not something to put on the striving for pedestal. My opinion, anyway. My perception. I don't see any reasonable argument, defending impulsive, compulsive. There probably needs to be another impulsive type word for the kind of, desire to excess. A lack of caution, a lack of risk aversion, a lack of thoughtful deliberation. All those things are negative things. What's the point? The underlying argument he's making is something like, no matter how bad the ride, you're supposed to stay in the game. You're supposed to keep putting quarters in. And, that's the sensible thing to do somehow. Even though you see the game as futile and pointless and unproductive, somehow you're supposed to keep playing. And it's like, the reality here is if you have some sensitivities, this is a game that's basically set up to harm and shock and abuse things you care about, things you care for. As you play the game, will endure harm as you play, and you're not supposed to be troubled by that. Find it discouraging, and think the game less than sufficient. Feel like there might be a gun to your head in many ways. You're being extorted, forced to march. The tyranny of the game players. Strap them in and juice them up. But I mean, obviously, you can use metaphors to things that you might care about, things that you think have value, and to have them disgraced and ruined, you might find that a world that's too insufferable. I think everybody does have an imagined line that if it were crossed, they could stand no more. And so it's all about what you're sensitive to. And Kantavad is basically saying, I have these insensitivities to, the indignities of overt harm to animals. Perhaps he doesn't care too much about birth defects and, the blights of poverty and the horrors of diseases. None of that daunts him any, causes him any personal grief, because he's above it. It's not going to, it's not going to, it might shake him, it might stir him, but it won't shake him, kind of thing. So he'll remain quite capable of continuing to play, right through that kind of minor, oh, boo-hoo. So a few billion animals suffer. I'm having a good time. That's essentially the attitude he's expecting me to embrace, and it's insane. So, I guess the argument is, philosophy can be shaped by disposition, by your personal feelings, in the sense that you can have less momentum going into the game, and you'll play a different game. You'll need to play a different game in that circumstance. So it will be a lot harder to justify how much you're paying for it when you don't really want it. It's the old, people buy you Christmas gifts you have no use for. You would never spend the money. So yeah, the value equation is decidedly deficit, and you can be driven there, I suppose, by that tempered desire, and for lots of different reasons. And that tempered desire gives you perspective that might make you see more darkness, because you'll have less of this enthusiasm thing. And then that lack of enthusiasm will lead to this darker perspective, and then it can work the other way as a perspective. Your understanding of the futility of the chase, the fact that you want, but you know that when you get it won't do the job. You won't finish. You never get to finish the game. The game is going to make you want something else, and then something else, and then something else. And your capacity to stay satiated will be quite limited, especially if reality imposes a few, squirmy discomforts on you physically, a few liabilities or disabilities. It's going to be pretty hard to fight through those. And maintain some sort of, joy as you suffer, which makes little sense. So, the two feed on each other. I think that there's a spiral of depression where, the more depressed you get, the less you can see anything valuable. But I think that's, again, a symptom of the lack of desire. And there's clearly it is just a desire game. That's all there is that keeps people playing. Take away the hunger and there's no food. It just isn't. There's no point in playing without it. And it's decidedly inviting this negative addictive syndrome. So I guess that's if I could classify all optimists into one thing, I'd say they all have an addictive syndrome. They're all caught up in a fairy tale of bullshit where they're pretending not only that the world isn't as bad as it appears, but that the future won't be as bad, that somehow they're going to escape the worst of it. And they can imagine the worst of it if they try. But they're not trying. They're trying to do exactly the opposite. They're trying to stay above and outside the harms of perception, of having to deal with it as a reality, as a gun pointed at them. So they're just pretending it. They can't. They assume they can do nothing about anything. At least they've drawn that conclusion, and therefore, they just are now capable of ignoring the guns pointed at their head and pretending none of them are going to go off, kind of a thing. And but whatever. I guess that, you know, it's just so difficult to respond to Antikontavod's videos because they have these completely insane premises built into them, and you're saying, wait, you mean I have to defend accountability and responsibility? Oh, please. So yeah, I'm not going to do a hard defense of these things, but I mean, kind of obviously, I think there's no reason to call accountability and responsibility psychiatric syndromes. You know, hey pup. They're not things that are made up by your emotions, and they're not personal prejudices and all that kind of crap. I mean, you know, these are real concepts based on real outcomes, probabilities, possibilities, and the fact that you can have a positive and negative impact on the world around you, and you can know it ahead of time, and it takes a minor bit of work to do that. You know, if you hear the brakes squeaking, yeah, you fix the brakes. And if you don't fix the brakes, people can call you asshole, and perfectly reasonably. There's all kinds of little things you have to do as matters of taking responsibility for your life. He's arguing that people should take responsibility for their depression. I would sort of agree. But likewise, people have to take responsibility for their behavior in the world, their net effect on the sentient welfare on Earth, and this whole philosophy of the selfish asshole is just so colossally fail. It is profoundly ignorant. And yeah. So anyway, sorry, kind of a rambly video, but surprised I was able to make it at all. Yeah. I mean, I was dead tired, you know, a few days ago. Couldn't even move. So now I'm not tired. But now my stomach is just so shitty. It's just such a, you know, it's like this is how it always works. If one part of me's working, the other part is shit. And now I gotta kind of jump into the water. Yeah, fuck it. Oh. Well, so far so good, but yeah, I should have gone the other way because this way I have to cross twice. Okay, doesn't matter, I made it. Mostly. Fuck. So, yeah, until next time, and such. Sorry, I do have to do something concise, just really hard-hitting, concise video, just going right through what it is to be a consciousness, being logical, recognizing the game we're in, recognizing that this body is just one body of 7 billion, this brain is one brain, the two aren't necessarily connected beyond the fact that they share a relationship to each other in terms of surviving, but beyond that, this brain should be working for all the feeling things, and this body shouldn't take more than it gives. Pretty simple. Anyway, till the next time, and such and so forth.